So, as our speaker will be doing the reading this morning, I will introduce him now. Eric Kraemer is a longtime member of La Crosse UU Fellowship, a dear man. In addition to singing in the choir, he also currently serves on the Board of Trustees and the Sunday Service and Music Committee. And in a previous life, he taught philosophy for 3 decades at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. It's a joy to have you speak to us this morning, Eric.
We'll see about that. Here's the reading, and I'm not going to read everything I'd like to read because it goes on and on and on. But if you have a Hebrew Bible, you might want to read a little bit before the part that I start. I'm starting on Judges, chapter 15, verse 14. And when he came unto Lehi, the Philistines shouted as they met him, and the Spirit of Jehovah came mightily upon him, and the ropes that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his bands dropped off his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and smote 1,000 men therewith. And Samson said, because it was Samson, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of an ass have I smitten 1,000 men. And it came to pass, when he had made an end to the speaking, that he cast away the jawbone out of his hand, and the place was called Ramath-Lehi. And he was sore athirst, and called upon Jehovah, and said, Thou hast given me great deliverance by the hand of thy servant, and now shall I die for thirst, and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised. But God clave a hollow place that is in Lehi, and there came water thereout. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived. Wherefore the name thereof was called En-Hakkore, which is in Lehi unto this day. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. Next chapter. This is the important one. And Samson went to Gaza, and saw there a harlot, and went in unto her. And it was told the Gazites, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in, and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the morning, saying, Let be till morning light, then we will kill him. And Samson lay till midnight, and arose at midnight, and lay hold the doors of the gates of the city, and the 2 posts, and plucked them up, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the mountain, and it is before Hebron. And right after that, he meets Delilah. That's the reading. Notice where he went. Do I just talk?
Sure.
I just talk. Okay. Okay. Oh, good. I get 20 minutes. Wonderful. Okay. I got to say something about the reading and the song. The song comes from a 1960 movie. The title is Exodus. The lead was played by Paul Newman. Very heroic movie. I sang this song in elementary school and didn't think anything about it. I think, oh, what a wonderful song. It's very exciting. Anyway, but notice the message of the song. It plays into a narrative that Hollywood thought would sell really well. This notion of Israel being the land that God gave to the Jews is very, very powerful. I think that message is still in a lot of subconscious thinking that's going on in this country, certainly in Israel. The reading is from Judges, and as I'll tell you later, I went to Hebrew school for a while and read a lot of the Old Testament, And I was always puzzled by the claim that God gave Canaan, that's what they called it with two A's at the end, which I think is a great spelling, Canaan to the Israelites. But there are a whole bunch of other people there too. And I'm thinking, what a gift. You get to go to Canaan and fight your way for, hundreds of years and kill a whole bunch of people and get killed by hundreds of people. But somehow it's yours. And thinking, maybe that was the wrong message. Maybe God gave it to everybody. And maybe the thing to do is to figure out how to live together. But no, that's not the message. But the important point is that there were a bunch of Gazites at the same time as these Israelites. Whether they are in fact, whether current Palestinians are in fact descendants of the Gazites is of course an interesting question. But there was a place called Gaza, and Gaza was important. And Samson was killing in huge numbers of Gazites. If you read a little bit before, what you discover is that the Philistines had just burned his wife alive with their child. So you sort of understand maybe why he did what he did, but still, the numbers are important. Today is a UN Sunday. The UN Sunday is something that is a tradition that was started several decades ago by our beloved member of our fellowship, Bob Ramlow. And he would regularly present on an important topic that related to what the United Nations was doing. He was succeeded by another long-term and a much appreciated member, Ray Sterrett, who then passed it on to me. These presentations typically took place in October, near the anniversary of the establishment, or the establishment of the United Nations in 1947. And their work was carried out in conjunction with an office that the UUA had at the United Nations. Well, guess what? COVID happened, and the office closed, and we used to get all kinds of wonderful information about a special topic that we were supposed to listen to. That's been passed on to the Social Justice Committee maybe 2 years ago. I have yet to see any information. So it looks as though the UN Sunday tradition is kind of dying officially in the national organization. That's no excuse for us. Right. My message to you today is that even though we're involved in trying to act locally, to do what we can to make the world a better place, we still need to be thinking globally. And we can't forget what else is going on in other parts of the world. Why did I pick Gaza this year? Well, first, we're all aware of the sheer scope of the death and destruction that's taking place in Gaza. Last number I saw was, 54,000? You may have seen something higher. Was listening to the news late last night, not the American news, but the French news, and 100 people have been killed in the past couple days. Tens of thousands of refugees. The health and education infrastructure has been totally destroyed. Similar things that have been happening in parts of Ukraine have happened on a regular basis in Gaza. We get upset about what happens in Ukraine. We kind of forget what happens in Gaza. Secondly, I've been having this running discussion with my Canadian daughter, who has been bugging me and reminding me that U.S. media does a terrible job of reporting what's going on in Gaza, whereas Canadian media and European media do a much better job. And so we've been having all kinds of arguments about how bad things are, and she's been telling me, "Oh no, Dad, you're wrong. You're not getting enough information." Third, while various organizations associated with the United Nations are trying to address the situation, political activity has been largely ineffectual. And so the question we need to be thinking about is, what can we do? And so that's what the question I'm going to be posing to you at the end. I'll be looking for your help. Let me remind you about the United Nations and some things that relate to Gaza. In 1947, guess who set up the current, or the initial situation of Israel and Palestine. It wasn't the British. The British had an idea, but it was officially ratified by the United Nations. So that was the beginning of the troubles. In 1948, since 1948, at least 79 resolutions relating to the Arab-Israeli conflict have been passed by the United Nations. According to Rashid Khalidi, who wrote this book, curious thing, I just happened to have it there, and Carmen said, "Oh, I read all of that. I was very impressed." I've only been able to read the first chapter and the last chapter. The in-between chapters are so filled with details that my mind is not able to deal with them. But if you want to know something, it's a terrific book. It's called 100 Years of War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi, who is the Edward Said Professor of Mideastern Studies at Columbia, and probably on the current administration's bad list. Anyway, there have been 7 major conflicts. His book was written in 2020, so it was before the 8th major conflict that's going on. As a result, the UN has sent in peacekeepers to the region 6 times, and 3 missions are still ongoing. A little more than a year ago, on March 26th, a report declaring that Israel is committing suicide in Gaza was delivered in Geneva at the United Nations Human Rights Council. On April 2nd of this year, the UN Secretary General condemned the death of 1,000 people since the collapse of the ceasefire on March 18th. According to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, 408 aid workers, including 208 people who work for the United Nations, have been killed since the war began on October 7th, 2023, including a particularly gruesome mass killing at the end of this past March. In sum, the UN has been and continues to be involved in the situation in Gaza, but not in New York, mostly on the ground. What I do want to talk, so why do I want to talk about the connection about Passover and Gaza? Well, as a member of the program committee, I thought about how I might want to contribute this year. And then I remembered Passover, and it stirred within me something deeply troubling and significant. And so this is my personal journey that I want to share with you today. One thing that some of you may remember about me is that I am what the Nazis would have called a Mischling, a mixture. That is, half Jew, with Jewish Russian ancestors, and half Aryan. I actually have German Lutheran and German Catholic ancestors on the other side. So I'm a true Judeo-Christian. As a result, I was exposed at an early age to a mixed religious training. During my elementary years, my siblings and me would regularly attend Hebrew school on Saturdays, and of course the Unitarians on Sundays. This was before merger, so it wasn't the UUs, it was just the U. Early on, I was directly acquainted with that complicated ritual with its special scripts called the Haggadah, the songs and the foods that celebrate the Israelites being released from bondage in Egypt, which constitute Passover. So I had quite a few Passovers as a youth. And then when I think about my relation to Passover since then, I discovered that I have 3 connections, which explain my current obsession with this topic. Cole, I need the Seder plate. Okay. There we go. My father's mother's father, you got that? Father's mother's father, was a rabbi and a Zionist. He immigrated from Russia to England in the late 19th century. After having established a family there, he then brought his family to New Jersey at the beginning of the 20th century. And he stayed in New Jersey until 1923. After supervising the bar mitzvah of my father, because you can't trust it to just anybody if you're a rabbi, he immigrated to Palestine, where he lived until sometime in the mid-30s. I've not been able to figure out exactly how long he lived there, because I know that I have a cousin who is named after him, and in Jewish tradition, you can't name somebody after somebody living. So, and he was bar mitzvahed in 1947 or 48, I think. So, subtract 13 or 14, and that's probably about the time that, in the 30s, that my great-grandfather died. Due to complications involved in settling his estate, my father did not receive his princely inheritance from that estate, which is about $50, until the 1950s. And my parents decided that the best thing to do with the money, since they couldn't do much else with it, was to buy a Seder plate. And that's the Seder plate that they bought. It's in my brother's house in Birmingham, so I asked him to send a picture so I could share it with you, and you can get rid of it now. And my family used this Seder plate to celebrate Passover in our home. My second connection with Passover has to do with my actual training in Hebrew school. Every week, every Saturday, we received a publication called The Hebrew Reader, which was modeled after the Weekly Reader. How many of you actually read the Weekly Reader? I love the Weekly Reader. The Hebrew Reader was a Jewish version of the Hebrew of the Weekly Reader, and as you can guess, in the 50s, it was definitely aimed at trying to support, to drum up support for Israel. And so, as a result of reading the Hebrew Reader and reading the Bible and reading the great stories about Samson and killing all the Philistines, I came to think of Passover as a kind of triumphal establishment of the state of Israel. I have this kind of triumphalist version of Passover as celebrating the actual existence of Israel that managed to survive and hang on despite being surrounded by hostile Arab tribes. Over the years, then, I was able to attend a number of remarkable Seders that somehow made their way into my life. And I was always struck by the fact that what was emphasized during the Seder was hospitality, the idea that you had to invite people to be part of the ceremony. Okay. Finally, in the recent years, my late wife and I were blessed by being able to attend a kind of Passover, one that was being held by much more liberal Jews, which drew direct connections between the Exodus story and the need to free everyone from slavery, the need to create conditions of social justice for all human beings. Since my wife's death, I've been lucky to continue this tradition, except for this year. I didn't feel like doing a Seder this year. I also didn't have the opportunity because none of my liberal friends were around, and I thought, I don't want to go elsewhere. Needless to say, the more recent social justice celebration of Passover has made a lot more sense to me by giving a genuine moral core to the celebration, by making it applicable to everybody. The concern that motivates me this morning is my worry that what I now view as a selfish triumphalist interpretation of Passover in Israel and perhaps parts of this country is supplanting this deeper interpretation of Passover as a more generous and broad appeal to social justice for all. Now, as should be clear, I used to think Passover was a solution to a particular political problem just involving freeing the Israelites. I now see it in a different light. I'm a philosopher, I have to think about these things. Namely, it's the result of a very basic problem that we humans have never been able to solve. It's the problem of land ownership that arises when different groups from different societies are in conflict, and there's no common authority that both respect. Who actually owns what parts of Greater Palestine? The problem is that before 1948, there hadn't been a Jewish kingdom for, I could ask Wesley for exactly how many years. I'm sure he'd be able to tell me. Certainly 50, maybe at least 2000, if not before. And there's never been an official Palestinian state or kingdom or monarchy or anything like that. Palestinians have been under the rule of one empire after another. It was before 1948. It was the British. They were British mandate because the British got the area after World War I. Before that, it was the Ottomans that go back to something like the 15th century, if not before. So there's never been a kind of an official. It's not as though we can say, well, this is how it used to be, so we should do it this way. I mean, anyway, so how is the problem going to be solved? Various answers have been proposed, but none is going to satisfy any of the parties involved. Here's my bold philosophical claim. Property ownership is purely a matter of convention that is recognized as valid by the dominant forces in a single social setting. There's no such thing as property or ownership in nature, only in a commonly shared society. But if there are two different societies both claiming the same thing as their property, and these societies do not recognize another common standard, or a common standard to resolve their dispute, then since the convention is not shared, there's no coherent resolution. It's possible. The only means that's left is some kind of negotiated settlement in which both parties come to agree on some kind of a compromise. One part going to one group, one part going to another. But since neither side's conventions are being used to create the compromise, it's usually very difficult, if not impossible, to get agreement. And all too often, the only solution is to resort to aggression and violence, which has been going on since 1948. Now, we should note that we're no better off. For our own land acknowledgement statement, which we somehow have gotten rid of, was a way of admitting that we have no really good answers to this question either. La Crosse was settled by those who bought land from the federal government, who had the land because they brought in the army to chase away the Native Americans who were living there, who, by the way, had chased away or eliminated or totally combined with the groups that had been living there before, who had chased away and so forth, going back to 11,000 years in this area? The difficulty we all face, no matter how long our ancestors have lived in some place, is how do we show that they were the original inhabitants? Now, I do know of some exceptions. Australia seems to be an exception. The North Pole seems to be another exception where we can find these things. But otherwise, there's been fighting going on for a long time. Got to share a little fact with you. Went to the Science Museum with my grandchildren about 3 weeks ago in Minneapolis, and they had this wonderful display on humans going all over the earth. Guess where the first place that humans went after they left Africa was? Palestine. Goes back 177,000 years, apparently, according to the best archaeological evidence we have now. So people have probably been fighting over Palestine for an awful long time. I was kind of blown away by that. I was convinced it was the Fertile Crescent or some other, but no, that's Palestine, at least so far. I mean, as you know, these things change daily. But back to what really bothers me. What really bothers me about the situation is all the people acting like Samson and going around and taking jawbones and killing thousands. And so how do I find solace about this? Well, I'm very lucky. I have some very smart friends. And one of them sent me an article entitled Peoples Under Threat, Americans, Arabs, and Israelis. It was written shortly after 9/11 happened by a social psychologist at UC Santa Cruz named Thomas Pettigrew. And the article appeared in the journal called Peace and Conflict, the Journal of Peace Psychology, early in 2003. It's 22 years ago. Now, Pettigrew emphasizes that people under threat will accept what he calls values violations. He makes a point of emphasizing that all three of the cultures he's talking about, the Palestinians, the Israelis, the Americans, all have very strong values. But they're willing to give them up under certain circumstances. What are those circumstances? Well, there's perceived to be a collective threat from seemingly random acts of terror, like the random bombings by Hamas or the Israeli attacks. And then the second factor, which is maybe even be more important, collective humiliations that are experienced. The shame that was felt by Israel after October 7th, the shame that's been felt by Palestinians for decades, the shame that was felt by the United States after 9/11. Do you remember how we behaved as a country toward various groups after 9/11? The values violations that we were willing to accept? And the only person who was willing to stand up to the Patriot Act was our own Senator Feingold. You know, values violations. Pettigrew's description is helpful to us because we can see how we've behaved, and if we can understand how we could behave, then we can understand how the Palestinians can behave, and we can understand also how the Israelis are behaving. And this may help us address the problem at issue. We can also understand the kinds of tactics that these Palestinian groups have historically adapted and that Hamas is now using. Pettigrew claims that there are three commonly disturbing results that result from this threat and the humiliation. First of all, there's violence spiraling. So violence becomes, a little amount of violence becomes a greater amount of violence, and so on and so on. The second thing that's really disturbing, and this hits us personally, is that all of a sudden people start supporting authoritarianism. And the third thing is that what goes on is something he calls mirror imaging of beliefs, where you take the opposite of reality as truth. And so whenever you hear criticism, you say it just reflects prejudice. And while you're busy committing horrible things, you say, we're not the victims. Sorry, we are continuing to be the victims, because after all, think of the Holocaust. We're victims, we're not perpetrators. And then the third one that's really painful is they're going to swamp us out and drive us from our land, which clearly played a factor recently in this country. So what are we going to do? Looking at the time here, I better quick move on to this. I think we all recognize that our own political situation is now at a terrible standstill. The moral suasion that our government used to be able to exercise to minimize violence has been abandoned in favor of opportunistic greed. We can write to our congresspeople about reducing violence, we can demonstrate, but until we have a different situation at the national level, we have few options for making immediate change. But I want to insist, that should not mean that we should become hopeless. Perhaps the most important thing that we can all do now is to continue to be aware and to bear witness to what is happening in Gaza. Being aware and bearing witness to anything outside our own lives in our current situation is not easy. We are constantly beset with radical chaos that affects our personal lives, the lives of those we care about, the institutions that provide meaning to our lives, and those institutions that offer hope for future progress on a daily basis. But if we can stay aware of the bad things not happening to us in our own country, but to others, as well as remember them, then we can hope that when the situation changes, in what we hope to be not the too far distant future, then we can have more influence on helping those who have been our staunch allies in the past, not to engage in values violations, but rather to engage in activities that align with their values. And of course, there are other things we can do as well. We can identify, and we need to continue to identify acts of extreme violence. We can write to our representatives, calling for a reduction of the violence. We can point out the dangers of authoritarianism, both in Israel and Gaza, as well as in Washington. We can insist that legal procedures be followed, and we can attempt to undercut the mirroring of beliefs by helping diffuse striking evidence to the contrary. We need to emphasize how values violations do not reflect the best selves of those involved or their noblest natures. And in this, I think we can find some values and lessons in the Passover service itself that we might appeal to as well. The most important negative lessons from Passover is that loss of liberty, oppression, and suppression are all bad. Well, if it's bad for the Israelis, guess what? It's going to be bad for Palestinians too. And I think there are two positive lessons from Passover that need to be promulgated as well. First is the importance of hospitality, welcoming the stranger, and the importance of having hope in a better, and the second is going to be the importance of having hope in a better future. What we need to help both Israelis and Palestinians see when we're able to do so is that these lessons apply to everyone, as we say in our Unitarian Universalist principles. What's bad for one group is bad for others as well. And if we're hospitable to others, especially strangers, then we can all work together for a better future. I'm going to end with a pipe dream. I've never gotten a chance to do that. One of my father's sisters visited Israel in the late 50s, and she tried to find out where her grandfather had lived. She claimed some success. She said she found a house where he'd lived. Apparently, it still had a large collection of books in it, some orange groves nearby, and she also found someone who claimed to know something about her grandfather. She was told that he had been a scholar, had lived a quiet life, had gotten along well with his Palestinian neighbors. So I now find myself wondering about my great-grandfather. Did he really get along with his Arab Palestinian neighbors? I'd like to think so. How did he envision the future in the 30s? Would he now be happy or sad? I'd like to think that as both a rabbi who read widely and also as a pioneer in a new land who had to figure out how to get along, he would have envisioned a very different kind of Palestine. Perhaps after living some time in that great melting pot of America in the first quarter of the 20th century, he could envision a religiously plural community where the advantages of multiculturalism could be celebrated, where everyone could prosper. At least that's what I'd like to believe. And I still hope I will see a peaceful, flourishing, and more just arrangement for all parties in Palestine in my lifetime. Inshallah.